who had inspired me to work for adolescent health. I'm really honored to have you as my chairperson. And Taru, my dear friend, is such a good academician. It's my proud privilege to speak in front of you. My presentation is very basic. So over to you, Dr. Taru.
Dr. Chandan, you please introduce Dr. Anita.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, Dr. Anita, for your kind words. And really, it has been a very nice journey with you all friends, and learned so much from you. Mutual admiration, and with the words that adolescent is a window of opportunity for all of us to take care of the adolescents, so that the young adults and later on, the adults have a smooth progression towards healthy life. They don't land up in things like infertility and all because of PCOS. And definitely the adolescents are the future of our country, and we should take care of their health. So it's my proud privilege to introduce Dr. Anita. She is Senior Consultant and HOD, Department of Obstetrics and Gynae, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Hospital, Government of City of Delhi. And her affiliations are in Asian and Oceanic Federations of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, Federation of FOGSI, and Association of Obstetrics and Gynecology of Delhi, Delhi Gynae Forum, NARCHI, IMA, etc. Her major achievements are founder, Vice President, Delhi Gynae Forum, Southwest, Chairperson, Reproductive Endocrinology Committee, AOGD member, Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility Committee, AOFOG. So many accolades to her, and she is attached with Endocrinology Committee, Breast Committee, Food and Drugs Committee, Public Awareness and Family Welfare Committee, FOGSI, National Trainer of Trainers, Saath Saath, Laksha, Dakshata, HIV, so many of them, and wonderful work she's doing. She has many honors and awards like APJ Abdul Kalam Appreciation Award, Wonder Foxine Award. She is really a wonder Foxine.
Thank you.
Many publications to her credit. Welcome, Dr. Anita, for your talk. Even I am waiting to learn something new from you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Chandan. Can I share my screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
So today I'm going to discuss about a very basic presentation, which is on overview of PCOS. So can you see my screen? Are you able to see my screen?
No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Now we can see. Please make it full screen.
I think there is some net.
Now we can see.
Yeah.
I'm just make it full screen.
Make it slideshow.
It's coming now.
Yes.
There is some net problem here because it has rained heavily in this area of Delhi today. So we are going to discuss today about basics of PCOS, and overview, how to diagnose and how to manage this. So we all know the history of PCOD, its prevalence. Then we'll discuss its etiopathogenesis, what we have understood about it till date, and what are the recent guidelines about its diagnostic criteria, investigations, monitoring, and long-term implications of having PCOS. So it's a complex condition. It is a single most heterogeneous and multi-system endocrine abnormality of women of reproductive age group. Incidence varies in different studies from 2 to 20% to almost 70%, and most of them will remain undiagnosed in majority of the patients. It is mainly a disorder of adrenal, ovarian, endocrine axis. It may present with a variety of symptoms that may remit or they may relapse over time. The symptoms may be menstrual disorders, excessive hair on face or body, acne, infertility or subfertility, obesity, and difficult to lose weight. It is one of the leading cause of infertility. And the associated conditions may include type 2 diabetes mellitus, obstructive sleep apnea syndrome, mood disorders, endometrial cancers, and metabolic sequelae also are there. hypertension, dyslipidemia, visceral obesity, development of insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, and heart diseases. Regarding history of PCOD, it was first published in Italy in 1721. And in 1844, cis-related ovarian changes were described. Steen and Leventhal, they coined this term in 1935. In 1980, we came to know that it is linked to hyperinsulinemia and is associated with impaired GTT. In 2003, we got this Rotterdam criteria to diagnose PCOS. 2006, we came to know what are the various factors which lead to PCOS. Then 2007, ASHRAE ASRM sponsored PCOS consensus workshop group in fertility. They gave the guidelines for this, which were, again published in 2018 as Barcelona International Guidelines for PCOS. These are the two scientists who had worked on PCOS, Steen and Leventhal. Now, some facts and numbers. The prevalence of PCOS will depend what diagnostic criteria you are using. The WHO estimated that 116 million women worldwide were affected. And one community-based prevalence study using the Rotterdam criteria found that in about 18% women, they had PCOS, and majority, like 70% of them remained previously undiagnosed. Ultrasound findings of PCOS are found in 8 to 25% of normal women, and 15% women on oral pills are found to be having some PCO-like morphology on ultrasound. Then in last 15 years, we have come to understand that this is a disease which is a combination of insulin resistance, genetic and environmental factors. The risk factors for developing PCOS include obesity, lack of physical exercise, family history of someone with a similar condition. Then it is a disease of many theories. Most accepted is the insulin resistance or hyperinsulinemia. There is increased free testosterone and androgens, and there is increased LH. High androgen levels cause symptoms of androgen excess and inhibit growth of dominant follicles and prevent apoptosis of smaller follicles, causing multiple polycystic ovaries. Then how insulin resistance is linked to it? There is genetic predisposition to excess ovarian androgen secretion, which is a factor which leads to polycystic ovary. There is increased testosterone levels in the blood, and which further, and there is increased LH level also. All these complex mechanisms, along with insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, lead to anovulation. And increasing insulin levels and decreased SHBG levels in these, they can cause hirsutism. Then there are genetic and dietary factors which influence insulin secretion or its action, so leading to further insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. So all these things factors are interrelated to each other. Then fetal growth restriction in relation to PCOD. It is said that is an interplay of genes and environment. So when the fetus is having growth restriction in utero, the baby is born with low birth weight. And in early childhood, the baby develops adiposity. There is adrenal hyperandrogenism, premature adrenarche, and premature pubarche. Entering adolescence, this girl will have early menarche. There will be ovarian hyperandrogenism. She might develop metabolic syndrome, and then there will be development of full picture of PCOS, which may have long-term sequelae related to it. PCOS is a heterogeneous disorder of unknown etiology. There is familial clustering, and it is found to be present more in monozygotic twins, suggesting that there is some genetic element and it is inherited in a autosomal dominant manner with high penetrance. Each child thus has a 50% chance of inheriting the predisposing genetic variants from a parent. And if a daughter receives this variant, she will have the disease to some extent. The genetic variants may be inherited from father or mother, and it is passed to both sons and daughters. They may be asymptomatic carriers or have symptoms such as baldness or excessive hair, and daughters, they will show signs of PCOS. The phenotype manifests itself as these partially while raised androgen levels secreted by ovarian follicle theca cells. Regarding genes, exact gene has not yet been found. It is said to be polygenic inheritance, and current understanding of pathogenesis suggests that it is a complex multigenic disorder. So, regarding overview, genetics and lifestyle both have a role in development of PCOS because they cause hormonal changes which lead to obesity, and obesity further exacerbates hormonal changes. There is more androgen production leading to hirsutism and acne, and there is hyperinsulinemia, which causes development of metabolic syndrome or diabetes or increasing cardiovascular risk to these girls. Then both hyperandrogenemia and hyperinsulinemia acting together, they will cause anovulation, increase estrogen, menstrual disturbances, subfertility, and above all, psychological issues. There are a lot of body image, self-esteem, and issues in these girls leading to depression and anxiety. So how will this girl present to us? There are various phenotypes which have been highlighted in the information that there are 4 types: A, B, C, and D. They have in phenotype A, there is biochemical or clinical hyperandrogenemia and oligoanovulation with PCOS. While B will have biochemical or clinical hyperandrogenemia and oligo or anovulation without PCO. Similarly, C will have biochemical or clinical hyperandrogenemia and PCOS, but ovulation is going to be normal. And group D, this phenotype has oligo or anovulation and PCO without biochemical or clinical hyperandrogenemia. This classification makes the management a bit different. So these are the various features which are present in the 4 phenotypes. The first one is classic polycystic ovarian PCOS, and is classic non-polycystic ovarian PCOS. Third is non-classic ovulatory PCOS. Then the 4th one is. So women with PCOS, or they may present with hyperandrogenism. Irregular menstrual cycles may include delayed periods or heavy menstrual periods, or they may present with primary amenorrhea to a gynecologist. Then hyperandrogenism may present with hirsutism, acne, or alopecia. There is heterogeneity from etiology to clinical presentation and long-term prognosis. This is all intrinsic to PCOS. So patient can present with acne, acanthosis, hirsutism, obesity, maybe hair loss, irregular cycles, and infertility. So over the years, during her lifetime, the patient may initially at a young age present with reproductive disorders like menstrual problems, hirsutism, contraception problems, sexual health issues, infertility. While in older age, they may present with pregnancy complications, quality of life issues, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disorders, malignancy risk. So patients will jump from one specialist to another for this multidisciplinary management, right from pediatrician to dermatologist, gynecologist, then endocrinologist, maybe diabetologist, cardiologist, and geriatric experts. So what's new in international guidelines? We are now totally evidence-based. There is no controversy and there is no argument about the diagnosis of PCOS. The diagnostic criteria will include menstrual disorders or hyperandrogenism, which may be biochemical or clinical, or polycystic ovarian morphology. Then we are going to discuss monitoring in PCOS, chances of development of endometrial cancer, cardiovascular risk, and obstructive sleep apnea. International Consensus Guidelines 2018. The diagnostic criteria, as I've already highlighted, they are same as Rotterdam criteria, which were given by ASHRAE or ASRM in 2003. So, the patient who is likely to have any two of the following three symptoms will be labeled as PCOS. Like there is oligoovulation or anovulation, or there is clinical or biochemical hyperandrogenism, or polycystic ovarian morphology on ultrasound. So what are irregular menstrual cycles? So as Dr. Achla has already highlighted, that we have to be very cautious in labeling young girls as PCOS, because irregular cycles are very common initially after attaining puberty. So irregular cycles may be normal in the first year. We must understand this, that it is just post-menarche, it may be a part of pubertal transition. And more than 1 year to less than 3 years post-menarche, the cycles may be, if they are less than 21 or more than 45 days, then we will label them irregular. And if she is post-menarche 3 years, till menopause, we will say that if the cycles are less than 21 days duration, or they are prolonged more than 35 days, or the girl is having less than 8 cycles per year, then only we will label her as irregular menstrual cycle. And if you find that she is more than 1 year post-menarche, at any time of this, if she has any cycle which is prolonged for more than 90 days, like she's not getting period for 90 days, we will label her as having irregular cycle. So usually what happens is that by age 15 or more than 3 years post breast development, if the patient is not having period, then we call her as primary amenorrhea. And when irregular menstrual cycles are present, a diagnosis of PCOS should be considered and assessed according to the guidelines. There is ovulatory dysfunction in PCOD. It can still occur with regular cycles. And if you suspect an ovulation, it needs to be confirmed maybe by serum progesterone levels or evidence of ovulation. Then, as I've already highlighted, oligo and or anovulation presenting with irregular cycles, then there are features of hyperandrogenism. Hyperandrogenism may present either as a cause by ovary or by the causes may be in adrenal also. We have to rule them out. Ovary, what happens is there is, if we do the in vivo culture of theca cells from PCOS versus normal ovaries, it was found that there is increased steroid production and there is augmented expression of CYP11A and CYP17 messenger RNA in these girls. So these increased CYP17 and 3-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase enzyme activities more in these patients. And about adrenal, if we rule out adrenal as source of hyperandrogenemia, we must understand that ovarian products promote adrenal androgen production, and this causes GnRH analog, however, decreases DHEAS in PCOS. There is generalized hyperresponsiveness of adrenal cortex to ACTH in these girls, and there is overactivity of adrenal 17 and 22 lyse enzymes. Hyperinsulinemia, it promotes adrenal 17-hydroxylase and 17 and 22 lyase enzyme activities in adrenals. So there may be biochemical hyperandrogenism in PCOS, or there may be clinical signs of it. Regarding assessment of biochemical hyperandrogenism, it is most useful in establishing the diagnosis of PCOD and or phenotype of PCOD, because it is a main feature in which category the patient will fall. So if the hirsutism is obvious, we need not bother about it. But if there are no clinical signs of hyperandrogenism, then we need to assess the androgen levels in these patients. We must understand this also, that adrenal gland produces 90 to 95% of DHEA and DHEAs, while androstenedione is 50% produced by ovaries and 50% by adrenal glands. So if we try to find out the level, then unfound free fraction, there is approximately 2 to 3% testosterone is free or unbound. While the bound testosterone, it is either bound to specific plasma proteins, which are sexual hormone binding globulins, and other may be non-specific albumin. So to albumin, it is weakly bound, while SHBG binds it firmly so that it becomes biologically inactive. Only free testosterone is the active testosterone. So biochemical hyperandrogenism, you can calculate the free testosterone, or you can calculate free androgen index by total testosterone divided by sex hormone binding globulin into 100. So calculated bioavailable testosterone should be used to assess biochemical hyperandrogenism in the diagnosis of PCOS. Total testosterone may be normal, but the elevated free testosterone level may be there due to decreased SHBG level. Serum testosterone level more than 150 nanogram, and DHS is also marginally raised, and androstenedione is also raised. So androstenedione and dihydroepiandrosterone sulfate can be considered for estimation if total or free testosterone are not elevated. You have done the total or free testosterone, they are normal, but there are signs of hyperandrogenism, then you may consider estimating androstenedione and DHEAs. However, these provide limited additional information in the diagnosis of PCOS. So, important tip is where assessment of biochemical hyperandrogenism is needed in women who are on hormonal contraception. So, in these patients, we'll need to get the estimation of this done. While patient is on OCPs, we must recommend them drug withdrawal for 3 months, and then we should get the correct values. And meanwhile, she can have some non-hormonal alternative for contraception. Because you are giving OCPs, their true androgen levels may not be reflected in the biochemical analysis. Where androgen levels are markedly above lab reference range, other causes of biochemical hyperandrogenism have to be considered, like any androgen producing tumors from ovary or adrenal, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or exogenous use of androgens. Then neoplasm have to be ruled out. If you find there is sudden progression or sudden history, sudden onset, then you suspect that there may be some androgen secreting neoplasm. What about hirsutism? You should assess hirsutism by modified Fadiman-Galvez score, and if you find a level which is more than 4 to 6, that indicates there may be hirsutism, but you have to consider the ethnicity of the patient also. So this is how we do Fadiman-Galvez score. Alopecia. Alopecia may be another feature of hyperandrogenism, and Ludwig visual score is taken into account when we try to do the when we try to find the grade of alopecia. Similarly, acne, we don't have actually any visual assessment criteria till date, but you can have photographic pictures as for follow-up of the patient for assessing the clinical improvement later on. Now, regarding last feature, which is the polycystic ovarian morphology on ultrasound. So it should not be used for the diagnosis of PCOS in girls who are whose gynae age is less than 8 years, means they are less than 8 years post menarche, because as such there is higher incidence of multifollicular ovaries in this age group. So you see that on the right side of the screen, we can find there are multiple follicular cysts, but they are usually larger and distributed throughout the ovary. While in polycystic ovarian morphology, they are 12 or more subcapsular follicular cysts, which are usually 2 to 9 mm. And you find the central stoma to be hyper-echogenic, or the volume of the ovary will be more than 10 centimeter cube. So these are the other conditions which we must keep in mind while diagnosing polycystic ovarian morphology, because the normal women with normal ovulatory function, they are also found to be having polycystic ovarian morphology in few cases, like it may be up to 16%. Then some patients with hyperprolactinemia or hypothyroidism, they may present on ultrasound with multicystic ovary. In younger girls, it is said that sometimes there may be ovaries may be large with multiple cysts and ovaries, and you should not take any drastic decision to do any surgical maneuver in these patients, because when you treat hypothyroidism, these multicystic ovaries, they become normal. So it is just under the influence of hormones that they have become cystic. So we have to be very, very careful in young adolescent girls regarding that. Similarly, gonadotrophic hypogonadism, CAH, in these patients also, you may find every ovaries to be multicystic. So using endovaginal ultrasound, which transducers which have frequency which is more than 8 megahertz, the threshold of PCM should be either in each ovary follicle number of more than 20 or more than that, or ovarian volume is more relevant, which should be more than 10 ml. And you should ensure there is no carpus luteum or any other dominant follicle. So less than 8 years of menarche, post menarche, we should not take ultrasound as the only criteria for labeling them as PCOS. They may be labeled, they may be categorized into girls who are at high risk of developing polycystic ovaries later on, but we should not write, as Achila ma'am had very well highlighted, that we should not label them as PCOS. So TVS approach is preferable in diagnosis of PCOS. If it is applicable, then TVS is obviously better if we can do. But if in younger, definitely we have to do only transabdominal ultrasounds. So we have to bear these things in mind, that clear protocols are recommended for reporting follicle number per ovary, and these are the minimum standards you should stick to. What was our LMP, what was the transducer bandwidth you used, what was the root, abdominal or TVS, what was the total follicle number per ovaries, which were measuring 2 to 9 mm in diameter, was 3-dimension done, and what was the volume of each ovary. You should report on ET also, and other ovarian and uterine pathologies also should be commented upon. So there are some doubts about AMH. Is AMH important in the diagnosis of PCOS? No, it should not be used as an alternative for detection of PCOM. So we should consider ethnic variation also, and Caucasians have mild phenotype, while Southeast Asians, they have increased central adiposity in PCOS women, insulin resistant diabetes, metabolic syndrome is higher. So regarding follow-up, every time you should take weight, height, waist circumference, BMI, blood pressure taking is also important. At each visit, you must, while managing these patients, you should keep these things in consideration. Lipid profile has to be done. Definitely blood pressure monitoring, lipid profile has to be done, because we have to continuously counsel these patients for developing late sequelae. Then a diagnosis regarding menopausal PCOD. You can consider this diagnosis in that age group. If there is a past history of PCOS, or there is history of irregular cycles, hyperandrogenism, or polycystic ovarian morphology. There is increased risk of endometrial cancer. We all know that patient has to be persistently under follow-up, but routine TVS testing, however, is not suggested till you get any history of, irregular or unusual bleeding per vagina. Then there is increased risk of CVD. So you counsel the patient to keep normal weight, avoid cigarette smoking, control dyslipidemia, hypertension, and metabolic syndrome. And exercise, role of exercise cannot be undermined. So these are some of the symptoms which suggest insulin resistance. I am not going to the details because of lack of time. So OGTT is must in these patients. They should be regularly followed up with OGTT. And glycemic status should be assessed definitely as baseline workup in all patients with PCOS. During pregnancy, we have to keep these patients because they are likely to have more, these patients are at higher risk of all obstetrical complications. Then obstructive sleep apnea. This is another very important thing, which is, which has to be screened. This is specific. You have to specifically screen these patients for obstructive sleep apnea. There is a very good Berlin tool which can be used to find out if the patient is suffering from that. So, take-home messages are that you have to follow the guidelines which are evidence-based. There should be no controversy regarding diagnosis, and many criteria are suggested in our understanding of menstrual disorder, biochemical hyperandrogenism. So strict monitoring and follow-up of all these patients is required. So we can take any questions if there are at the end of the second session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Anita. It was a very wonderful presentation, an elaborate discussion on PCOS. You have very well covered in detail about the 3 diagnostic criteria of PCOS, and in fact covered all latest guidelines. So just to summarize, that PCOS is the most common endocrine disorder in the female. It may affect at any age, adolescent females, reproductive women, or a perimenopausal woman. And so we need to counsel about the concerned patient about the pathology, about the lifestyle interventions, and the long-term consequences also, because these patients, they need a long-term follow-up. So all these things, counseling, and we need to give proper time to the patients is a requirement for these patients. So thank you, Dr. Anita. It was a very wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Taru. Although very lengthy presentation, but it was just an introduction.
Covered entirely, actually, adolescent.
We will be all the aspects one by one. So today the second presentation is regarding this also. You had very well highlighted about the lifestyle modifications. So Yukti will be dealing with that. So over to you for next session, Payal. Thank you so much for chairing our session, Dr. Chandan and Dr. Taru. Dr. Chandan will say anything.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting us, and this was a lovely presentation covering every aspect of PCOS. The most relevant was that the diagnosis, that you should not underdiagnose and you should not overdiagnose it. And especially in adolescent PCOS, first 2 years at least, starting from Inarki, do not label them as PCOS patient. Thank you so much, Dr. Anita, for inviting. God bless.
Thank you for gracing the occasion. So now, Dr. Payal, you are going to introduce our revered chairperson for next session, Dr. Monica.
Yes, ma'am. First, let me thank you, ma'am. It was such a wonderful session with such a basic knowledge about PCOS, which is very, very important for all of us in diagnosis of PCOS. So coming to our second session, I invite both the chairmen, Dr. Monica Gupta. She is Professor VMMC and Safdarganj Hospital, New Delhi. She has done fellowship in urogynecology and pelvic reconstructive surgery. Her special interests are urogynecology, critical care obstetrics. She is Secretary AOGD, Foxy Delhi Society 2021 and 22. She is Secretary NARCHI Delhi 2018 and 2020. She is Editor ICOG 2017-18, Foxy ICOG Yearbook Obstetrics and Gynae 2018, 19 and 20. She is North Zone Coordinator of Foxy Food, Drugs and Medico-Surgical Equipment Committee. She is Nodal Officer of One Stop Center, Safdarganj Hospital. She has won many awards, Kamini A. Rao Yuva Foxy Orator Award, ICOG Travel Fellowship Award, DC Datta Foxy Award for Best Publication in Textbook 2019 and 2020.
Thank you.
Just a few moments. Best Young Faculty Award, Vishesh Seva Samman for Women Empowerment. She is author of many publications in national and international journals and book chapters, including Stats. She is on editorial board of Indian J of Obstetrics and Gynae Research AOGD Bulletin. She is reviewer of BJOG Jogi Cephog Journal, Fertility Science and Research, Venetia J of Medical Sciences. She is member of ICF AOGD Urogynecology Subcommittee, Foxy Urogynecology Committee. I welcome you, ma'am.
एक बात जो यहाँ ने लिखी है, बहुत अच्छी कवित्री और स्लोगन राइटर है। मेरी इससे सबसे पहले दोस्ती स्लोगन राइटिंग के साथ हुई थी। तो वेलकम मोनिका, and now
Thank you.
and now we welcome our dear own Dr. Sushma Sinha. Welcome, Dr. Sushma. Over to you, Payal. Please introduce Dr. Sushma.
Dr. Sushma Sinha, she is MD, FAMS, FICOG, FICMCH, and FIMSA. She is HOD and Senior Specialist, Government of NCT of Delhi. She is AOGD Subcommittee Chairperson, Breast and Cervical Cancer Awareness, Screening and Prevention Committee 2020 and 2022. She is Chairperson, Mission Pink Health, IOGD West Town, Executive WDW and IMA, Executive Member Breast Committee Foxy, North Zone Coordinator of FWC Foxy, VP DGF Southwest, District Nodal MTP Committee, District TOT, that is Trainer of Trainers, Contraceptive Care Around Birth Lakshya, Life Member of IMA, AOGD, NARCHI, BPNI and Foxy. She is Life Member and Patron of PCOS Society. IMA National President's Appreciation Award 2019. She has won Wonder Foxian Award 2019 at World Conference on Conception of Delivery 2019. Was awarded Certificate of Appreciation for year 2016-17 by ABGH Hospital. She has won first prize in West Delhi for Family Planning Services on World Population Day 2017. Welcome, ma'am.
So thanks a lot, Payal. Should we proceed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we are having a wonderful session here. Thanks, Dr. Anita, for inviting us here and starting this wonderful initiative of a very, very important topic on adolescent PCOS. And the best part is you will be dealing the subparts of adolescent endometriosis separately, which is really comprehensive, and so that the audience can get the best out of it. So I congratulate you for that. And having said that, your lecture was definitely real eye-opener and wonderful for the recent guidelines and the changes which all the postgraduates especially must know. So in continuum with your lecture, we have another wonderful presenter here, Dr. Yukti Vedavan, who will be presenting on the lifestyle modifications in adolescent endometriosis. She's a lovely person. I've known her for past few years, and so a personal welcome to you, Yukti. And let's hear what your CV says. You have done a fellowship in reproductive medicine and fellowship in minimal assist surgery, diploma in cosmetic gynecology and regenerative medicines, director of La Origin IVF and gynecology in Janakpuri. You have been vice chairperson in MPH IMA West Town, executive member of Foxy Adolescent Committee, AOGD Multidisciplinary Committee, AOGD Breast Committee, IMA West Town, DGF Southwest. And I've been an assistant editor in Reaching Out, the Journal of IMA West Town branch, and member of all the prestigious national and state organizations. And you have keen interest, as aptly you are presenting this, you have keen interest in PCOD, endometriosis, infertility, and aesthetic gynecology. And many health awareness camps and community activities have been done by you, and you have many papers and awards to your accolade. So I welcome you, Yukti, here, and I'm sure you will elaborate wonderfully on lifestyle modification on PCO, which is one of the very important things these days, because see, pathology and drugs, they eventually come any which way in, but adolescence is the time for habit forming. And if we can modify their lifestyle right at that time, we can nip the pathology in bud. So over to you, Yukti. We hope to.
I would also like to add one sentence to her credentials. She's a perfect example of how a young budding obstetrician or gynecologist can become an achiever. So congratulations, Yukti, for that.
So, thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, Dr. Monica, and thank you so much, Dr. Anita. I feel honored and blessed to be amongst all of you. I hope my screen is visible. Can somebody just... All right. So I know it is a time to rest for everybody, and I'm going to talk about lifestyle modifications. I'll try to make my presentation very interesting so that none of us feel sleepy. Okay. So to begin with, there have been numerous articles in numerous newspapers and magazines which talk about PCO, how it is, how people are battling, how people are suffering, they cannot conceive easily, and what are the natural ways and allopathic ways and adjuvant therapies, and how prevalent PCO is. And even we celebrate the PCOS Awareness Month, that is September. So this is what happens, you know, and with the PCO, and that is why it's so much talked about. Okay, and why is my slide not moving? Okay, so nobody's spared. In fact, the biggest of celebrities we have these days, everybody has, and people have been open enough to talk about their own PCS stories. Okay, why isn't it moving? Right. So just a brief overview quickly in a minute. PCOS is the most common endocrine disorder in women of childbearing age. It starts with adolescence, and around 20 to 25% of Indian women of childbearing age are suffering from PCOS. 60% of them are obese, 35 to 50% have a fatty liver, about 70% have insulin resistance, 60 to 70% have high levels of androgen, and 40 to 60% have glucose intolerance. It is more prevalent in Maharashtra somehow, accounting for almost about 23%. So I think all these things Anita ma'am has covered, and I'll just skip on, right? So these are the classical phenotypes which we have according to the Rotterdam criteria, right? This ma'am has covered. Okay, so I am directly coming to my topic. So this is what happens to the poor ovaries, and they are seeking help. So how do we deal with PCOS? So people are talking about all that: diet, exercise, reduce stress, do meditation, be positive, but how? So I'm going to outline my presentation and talk about diet, exercise, stress management, adequate sleep, avoidance of gadgets, and at last, the effect of COVID on PCO patients. So lifestyle modification is widely considered to be the cornerstone of polycystic ovarian syndrome treatment. About 45% of women with PCOS have reported that they have never been provided information about lifestyle management. So this highlights the significant gap in knowledge and is reflective of the lack of evidence-based guidance for lifestyle modifications. So diet. The diet has to be sensible and you have to change eating habits for long term. So when we counsel the patients, it is very important to tell them something that they can take on and carry on their entire life. Because as we all know, PCOS is not going to be cured right here. It has a high recurrence and it might just come back, a few years later. So we should advise the patients to take a low calorie diet for weight loss in overweight and obese patients. For a weight loss of half to 1 kg per week, the daily intake should be reduced by 500 to 1000 calories. A daily calorie intake of 1000 to 1200 calories will help most women lose weight safely. Reducing fat as part of a low-cal diet is a practical way. Cut down on salt intake, avoid ready-to-eat and canned foods as they have a lot of salt. Now, how do we decide what exactly should a low-cal diet be? So instead of frying foods, you can roast, bake, or shallow fry them. Microwave oven helps for easier fatless cooking. Coconut, malai, cream, and poppy seeds should be avoided. Reduce the amount of butter, cheese, and ice creams that you consume. So you can maybe have a cheat day, but instead of taking them daily, you can have it once in a while, once maybe in 15, 20 days. Avoid sweets or other high-cal desserts like halwa, ice creams. Substitute all these with a lot of fresh fruits, which are healthier and lower in calories. Grains such as wheat, rice, oat, cornmeal, and barley are naturally low in fat and provide nutrients important for good health. Try using skimmed milk or whatever milk you get, heat it, refrigerate for 24 hours, remove the malai from top of it, and rest you can use it. Replace fizzy aerated drinks with water. High fiber foods can help combat insulin resistance by slowing down digestion and reducing the impact of sugar on blood. This may be beneficial to women with PCOS. Great options of high fiber foods include all these below you can see: the broccoli, cauliflower, sprouts, red leaf lettuce, green and red peppers, beans, lentils, tomatoes, spinach, almonds, walnuts, olive oil, fruits like blueberries and strawberries. So, it's a very common thing. Patients say, "Aap sab kuch mana kar rahe ho, phir khaएं kya?" Come on, you have so many things which you can actually eat, which are going to do all good to you. So the lean protein sources like tofu, chicken, and fish don't provide fiber, but are filling and a healthier dietary option for such women. Instead of 3 big meals, they should have 5 small meals. This helps them metabolize food and also maintain weight. Okay. Right, so this is how you should divide the meal. So 7 to 7 should be the approach. She starts her morning at 7 a.m. So 7, 10, 1, 4, and 7 p.m. So specially counsel the patient not to have anything after 7 p.m., especially in terms of salt and sugar. She can minimize that. So just to bring to your knowledge, people amongst us who binge on drinking once in a while. So just one shot of any of the type of alcohol, whichever you consume. So to our surprise, it brings us more than 100 calories per shot. So this is like an eye opener, and people who binge on alcohol at times should think about it again. So not only is alcohol high in calories, but it can be a huge trigger to smoke. Avoid empty calories in alcohol and toxins also from tobacco. So what is important is getting started. So this is what we need to motivate the patient. And then she has to see, what is she eating? So what is important is move your body. So maybe, you can counsel her for some aerobics, some dancing, some Zumba, whatever she likes, but she needs to move. She should not be sedentary. Stop smoking and alcohol. and you are good to move forward. And once in a while, what is important is to reward success, but not with food. So rewarding yourself on achievement of your goals can encourage the achievement of further goals. All of us know that, and everybody, all of us feel good to be rewarded. So the rewards you choose may be material. Maybe you can go out for a movie, shopping, or, pamper yourself at a spa visit. Or maybe, you can take an afternoon off from work and spend some time with your pet. But such rewards are always welcome, and they are more effective in achieving smaller goals and then eventually turning out big. So dietary modifications alone, either through qualitative changes or caloric restriction, may improve insulin resistance and hyperandrogenism in PCOS patients. 5% weight loss through low-cal diets can improve reproductive system dysfunctions and also fertility. Diet therapy, that is a hypocal diet with low fat, low glycemic load, these are associated with a significant decrease in BMI and FG score, whereas this intervention had no significant effects on menstrual cycle, hormonal, and metabolic parameters. There was a meta-analysis of 8 studies which said that in PCOS adult women recommended a hypocaloric diet for reduction of BMI, treatment of PCOS with insulin resistance, prevention of high LDL, increasing the levels of FSH and SHBG, and decreasing the level of triglyceride. So this was a more recent study as compared to the previous one. So I have quoted it here. Now coming to exercise. So this is something, a common presentation. You ask the patient to follow up after 1 or 2 months and she'll be like, ma'am, I'm still living with it. I'm trying to lose weight and no matter how much I'm doing, but it's not happening. So what is to be done? Set the right goals. So effective goals are specific, realistic, and attainable. So for example, if you tell her exercise more, it is a fine goal, but it isn't specific enough. If you tell the patient walk 5 miles every day, it's specific and measurable, but it's hard to achieve. If we tell her walk 30 minutes every day, this is attainable, but most of the people are working and once in a while she gets caught up at office work or she's logged in, so she cannot. So instead, I tell patients walk 30 minutes, make sure that you walk at least 5 days a week. This is specific, achievable, and it's forgiving. If you are overweight, the initial goal of weight loss therapy should be to reduce your body weight by 10% from the baseline. The weight loss should be half to 1 kg per week for a period of 6 months, with a later approach based on amount of weight lost. Avoid crash diets because it deprives your body of vitamins, carbohydrates, proteins, and nutrients that needs to sustain itself. And when you go on a crash diet, your body will actually burn the muscle tissue to provide your brain with sufficient energy to function. Physical activity is important. So initially, moderate levels of physical activity for maybe around 30 to 45 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week should be encouraged, and gradually she can build on. So this is a fit therapy and I've liked it, so I mentioned it here. What is important is all our exercises should be based on frequency, intensity, time, and type. So 3 to 5 days per week is good. More frequent exercises are desirable, preferably all days of the week, but care should be taken to first establish a regular exercise habit, and then you can sustain it for a long term. Intensity, so to avoid injury and promote adherence, start at a low to moderate intensity and gradually increase over a course of several weeks or months. So emphasis should be not, instead of increasing the intensity, you should increase the duration of the exercise with the goal for optimizing energy expenditure. 30 to 60 minutes per day is a good time, and gradually you can progress this. Low impact activities, like something which we can do every day. We can go for a walk, We can go cycling. We can, maybe exercise like climbing stairs up and down 2-3 times. So low impact aerobics, these are convenient, more accessible, and perceived as enjoyable also. Resistance training should be performed 2 to 3 times per week. If people these days, prefer going to the gym, I guess it is the psychology that, they feel that since we have paid, so maybe we'll be more regular. So whatever works, they should do that. So one set of 8 to 15 repetitions at a moderate intensity using 8 to 10 different exercises that work each of the major muscle groups. Emphasize appropriately on warm-ups and cool-down periods. Focus and encourage increased participation in daily lifestyle activities, like I mentioned, climbing stairs whenever possible, walking greater distances. That is, you can park your vehicle, further away when you go to the mall, or maybe you can walk down during the lunchtime, walking down the hall instead of emailing in the office, or maybe they can indulge in some gardening and house cleaning. Physical activity should be an essential part of weight loss therapy and weight maintenance. Initially, moderate levels of physical activity, as I mentioned earlier also, should be started from 30 minutes per day and gradually increased. And if you don't have 30 minutes time daily at once, try breaking it up into 10 minute session, maybe 10 minutes post meals. So you can divide it like that. You can use the stairs instead of elevator at home or in the apartments or at the office. Get off the bus one stop early and walk the rest of the way. So, I tell my young college students that when you travel by metro, so get off one station prior and walk down. Park your car at the far end of parking lot at the mall and walk the extra distance. Swimming is a very good exercise for your entire body. Walk, bike, jog to see your friends. Take a 10-minute activity break every hour when you're reading, you're watching television, or you're working on your computers. And yes, play with kids. You will benefit from all the extra activity. So this is what the usual presentation of a PCO girl is. She's irritable, angry, stressed, nervous, exhausted, overwhelmed. She's panicky. She has a lot of body shaming issues. She's frustrated, hopeless. So we need to eliminate this. And how? This is where the role of stress management comes. So according to a study published in Tehran in 2012, it said that so many of PCO girls have stress levels, and they have seen that moderate stress levels were in about 40% of girls, and high stress levels were in about 36% of women. So if you account both these categories, you have more than 70% women who have stress issues. So 7 ways to lower stress right now. Implement the 5% solution. So each week, make one small change that moves you in the direction of lowering stress and healing. Think baby steps and keep going. Add in the good instead of taking away the bad. So instead of saying, I can't have this, say, I can have this. And this will encourage you to stay on track and be motivated. So one really simple thing you can do is add in more vegetables. For instance, if you're going outside, so you can just, cut some carrots and take them with you. So whenever you need something to munch on, you can take some carrot from your bag and then munch. Go paleo with beans and berries. So these are helpful, particularly in managing your blood sugar and insulin spikes, will lower stress dramatically. And protein is very grounding. So it helps with anxiety and depression because it feeds your brain with the necessary amino acids for building happy brain chemistry. So focus on your diet on healthy proteins, fats, and carbohydrates in the form of vegetables. You can add small amounts of low sugar fruits like berries, grapefruits, and maybe beans. Eat more fat. There is a theory which says you can have more fat because fat will feed your brain so you feel better, and it does not raise your insulin. So we keep the stress hormones down. Focus on ground flaxseed, coconut oil, coconut milk, olive oil, butter, ghee, nuts and seeds. Now, important is sleep. Sleep allows your body to heal, metabolize the stress hormones, and rebuild for the next day. So, it is essential for managing stress and get at least 8 hours sleep every night. And don't be up later than 10 p.m. Give yourself the gift of time. So, it is, I guess, important for any woman. We all need time. If we feel we don't have enough time, we get stressed. Especially in the morning, you should give yourself some time for self care to feel beautiful. Just, taking a bath with maybe some essential oils in the morning make all the difference in your day. And taking Epsom salt bath. So this has been something which I have commonly told all the young girls, and they have been enjoying all of this, that baths nourish the body in many ways. The warm water helps us feel less lonely. It lowers blood pressure, relaxes muscle, and helps to lower our stress hormones. And for women, it tends to be specially nourishing. So maybe, you can feel good. You can just light a candle, turn off the lights, relax in a warm bath, maybe in the evening when you go home with some Epsom salts and some lavender oils. So, holistic steps for treating stress. Very important. The first line of treatment has to be that figure out your emotional triggers and traumas. Whatever, whether they are chronic, they are acute, they are haunting you from the past or present, you need to figure them out so that you resolve them. Now, take help of some restorative exercises, which help by bringing your cortisol levels down. So, the high intensity exercises are not always recommended when your body is already exhausted and fatigued. So, instead of high intensity exercises, shift to Pilates or yoga, or maybe just a walk, and that itself works. Acupuncture helps to calm the body and mind and rebalance the body's blood and energy in a few cases. Meditation is an excellent way to quiet the mind and balance the body for just a few minutes each day. So collectively, this has a profound effect. Adequate sleep, very, very important. I find that most of my patients with PCOS spend a great deal of energy focusing on their diet and exercise regimen, but very commonly they neglect sleep. So studies have shown that 40% of us get less than 6 hours sleep at night. And women with PCOS have an even greater risk for sleep problems. So not just an inadequate sleep makes it difficult to focus, but also what you have to do for the day. You're incapacitated. And moreover, you're going to be binging on everything in sight at night. So sleep deprivation can affect almost every part of your body, ranging from your brain, muscles, immune system, and even skin. And if that's not enough, inadequate sleep can increase the risk of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, as well as cause inflammation and worsen your insulin resistance. And this is the last thing that a woman with PCOS wants. So this is the summary of a bidirectional pathway through which the PCO interacts with sleep disturbance with potentially detrimental effects on long-term cardiometabolic health. Since PCOS is characterized by metabolic disturbances, and as the endocrine system has an important role in governing sleep-wake cycle, it is likely that PCOS interferes with arousal and sleep, or that there is more complex interrelationship. Melatonin and cortisol play important roles in regulating sleep and wakefulness. Melatonin secreted by the pineal gland is increased at night and decreased during the day, thus communicating light-dark information. Cortisol, which is secreted from the adrenal cortex, and regulated by HPA axis, also follows a circadian pattern, steadily increasing during sleep and peaking by mornings. So this is the summary of psychosocial and behavioral factors that are common among PCOS and their potential contribution to sleep disturbance and disorders. So if you see the negative body image, the self-consciousness, and maybe they're not comfortable with the sexual intimacy, There is a low social support. So all in all, it contributes to a poor quality of life. This affects her mental health, causes anxiety and depression in them. And all of this is resulting in unhealthy lifestyle. That is when they want to binge on alcohol and smoke. All in all, this is contributing to sleep disturbance and various disorders. Women with PCOS tend to have more sleep problems than those without PCOS. There is a greater prevalence of obstructive sleep apnea in PCOS patients, possibly due to the mechanism associated with obesity caused by PCOS-induced metabolic abnormalities. Overweight women with PCOS with elevated androgens are 4 times more likely to have obstructive sleep apnea than the healthy woman. Studies have shown that sleep disorders in patients with PCOS might be related to raised nighttime urinary melatonin levels, which are associated with poorer sleep quality. Other hypotheses for sleep disorder includes the impact of insulin resistance and hyperandrogenemia. So 14 reasons why sleep is important. And I guess it's not just for PCOS, it's for all of us too. So it causes a lot of mood changes and not for good. So adequate sleep helps regulate mood and emotions. You can be more reactive to stress than usual when you don't get enough sleep. And in such patients, depression and anxiety are more common. The trends of chronic sleep restriction have paralleled those of obesity in recent years, suggesting that the epidemiological links between the two. Leptin, which is a satiety hormone, is decreased in sleep deprivation, while ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, is increased. So sleep-deprived people eat more calories. And studies have shown that women eat 329 more calories and men eat 263 more calories the day when they have only slept for 4 hours. So to make matters worse, inadequate sleep, this will decrease your motivation to exercise in the morning. Sleep deprivation increases inflammatory cytokines like TNF, interleukin 1 and 6. These cytokines disturb sleep. So the increased levels of inflammatory markers can increase GI diseases such as inflammatory bowel disease, colorectal cancers, gastroesophageal reflux, and liver disease have changed cytokine profiles. So sleep restriction increases insulin resistance, which is the last thing that a PCOS girl wants. As we know, insulin resistance can be a precursor to diabetes. Inadequate sleep has also shown to increase the risk of hypertension, a component of metabolic syndrome, and as a result, cardiovascular disease. Sleeping for less than 6 hours a night can increase your risk of developing high blood pressure or worsen if you already have high blood pressure. It can increase inflammatory markers, including white blood cells, interleukin 6 and CRP. Over time, skimping on sleep can increase your odds of developing cardiovascular problems. Carb cravings. This is one of the most common complaints I hear. Hyperinsulinemia is likely the cause for this. Sleep deprivation exacerbates this. Sleep is critical for the formation of consolidation of memories as well as your ability to retrieve them when awake. It becomes more difficult to focus on a task or learn something new. Your creativity is compromised as well as your ability to make decisions. Overall, it affects the work performance. Sleeping only 5 hours a night can have a similar effect on judgment and motor reaction time. And it's as good as, when you're legally drunk. This can be hazardous when driving or operating, not just machinery, operating on patients as well. Sleep affects our emotional intelligence. That is our ability to perceive and respond to others' emotional state as well as our own. And yes, inadequate sleep also causes anxiety and even suicidal thoughts. Sleep provides an opportunity for rejuvenation. So many of the critical restorative functions in the body, like tissue repair and muscle growth, occur mostly during the sleep. Do you feel that you're getting sick very often? So this isn't surprising. Probably when you're tired and even moderately sleep deprived, your immune function is compromised. And this can leave you vulnerable to catching colds, flu, and other infectious illness. During REM sleep, muscles are relaxed, which can help relieve tension and reduce symptoms of certain types of chronic pain. Just like you couldn't mentally focus for 24 straight hours at your day job, your body needs a break to chill out and so that you're ready to conquer the next day. Consistently skimping on sleep can lead to premature wrinkling and sagging of skin, partly because cortisol can break down collagen, which helps your skin smooth. I don't think any of us wants that to happen. So this is again various studies which are saying the same thing, that PCO patients have more sleep disturbances. And this is more model of interdisciplinary care, which is ideal recommendation for women with PCO. So not just we, but along with the other medical specialists, the allied therapist. So it has to be an interdisciplinary care to let the patient be free from it. So now coming to impact of electronic gadgets. So are you using your smartphone right now? Well, many of us would be. I'm sure a lot of our audience must be watching this presentation on a smartphone. So chances are, if you're not holding it in your hand, it's probably right beside you or in your pocket or bags. Cell phones are admittedly low-level emitters of electromagnetic radiation, but the sheer frequency in which we use them makes them significant sources of radiation anyway. You probably don't realize it, but during the entire time you spend browsing on Facebook, WhatsApp, taking selfies, or playing your favorite games on your mobile phone, you've been constantly exposed to a series of small yet steady doses of radiation. Of course, that's not to say that using your smartphone will certainly undermine your chances of having a baby successfully, particularly in the PCO patients. So these are potential effects of cell phone radio frequency on male and female. So eventually, because we feel that most of our PCO patients are the patients who respond, who are coming to us as infertile patients. So that is why this slide was of importance here. And you can see what is the effect of cell phone on the ovary, the endometrium, and eventually the embryo. So it has been found that there is a link between smartphone radiation and decreased sperm motility and count. We all know this. So why don't you think it has a similar impact on women and infertility? So let's think of some measures we can adopt to minimize the impact of these radiations in our lives. I'll come about in another minute after this slide. Okay, so heating your food in microwave can strip away its original nutrients. What may have started as a nutritious plate of food might be just evolving into some dead food. So according to a study published in Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry, researchers decided to examine the effects of microwave heating on the loss of vitamin B12 in foods like raw beef, pork, and milk. And the results showed there was a 30 to 40% loss of vitamin when the foods received microwave exposure. So when you heat foods that are wrapped in plastic in the microwave, you can create carcinogens. This is something which was very much talked about a while back. And perhaps that is the reason we've all shifted from plastic containers to glass. Microwave can produce effects on your body instantly due to 2.4 gigahertz radiation, the frequency of radiation emitted by microwave ovens. So according to a study conducted by Dr. Magda Havas of Trent University, found that the levels of radiation emitted by a microwave affect both heart rate and heart rate variability. So now what do we do to minimize all these exposures? So medical experts suggest going on hands-free mode. So either use headphones, speaker, or Bluetooth instead of directly using your smartphones. Avoid keeping your cell phone in your pocket or placing it on your lap. Even when you're not using it, it is still emitting radiation if it's turned on. So one way to deal is that, you can either put the phone in your bag instead of carrying it with you, or maybe, you can use it, you can switch it off when you're not using it. So try to minimize the amount of time you spend on gadgets. Instead, think of a better activity. Think of going for a walk, or maybe try gardening. Don't sleep next to your phone. In fact, if you can, don't keep it in your bedroom while you sleep. That is what the experts say. If you need an alarm, buy an alarm clock. So perhaps these days, most of our other appliances in the room have taken a back seat. We don't require them because all their job is done by one smartphone. Maintain a healthy distance from your computer when you're working. An arm's length would do just fine. Don't walk too close to smartphone towers and transmitters. Rely less on microwaving your food. Instead, stick to conventional types of cooking. Now talking about effect of COVID on PCOS. It's hit all of us bad, and especially the PCOS girls. So these are all the thoughts. Already the poor girl, she's going through a lot of anxiety and depression, and then COVID has come. Okay. So women with PCOS are at significantly increased risk of contracting COVID-19 as compared to women without the condition. This was a recent study published in March 2021. Women with PCOS have an increased risk of cardiometabolic disease like type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and high blood pressure, all of which have been identified as risk factors for COVID-19. Results revealed a 51% increased risk of contracting COVID in women with PCOS as compared to those of the same age and background without PCOS. Another publication in European Journal of Endocrinology showed that incidence of COVID-19 in women with PCOS was almost twice the rate than in women without PCOS. The pandemic has already altered our current healthcare delivery models, and there is an increased number of virtual consultations, and methods of delivering remote healthcare have been commendable. So encourage your patients to take an online consult maybe instead of a traditional clinician-patient live consultation. So this was a study which is very recent, it was published in 2021, and it also showed that there was an increased rate of COVID-19 infections in the PCOS population. And the risk was around 51% more as compared to the normal. If you see here, this picture, so you have that, most of the symptoms which are there, which are increasing the risk of COVID, are overlapping and connected to all the cardiometabolic risk in the PCO group as well. So clinicians treating women with PCOS, irrespective of their specialty, should assess the risk profile of these patients. Women with PCOS and type 2 diabetes or hypertension should be informed of potential high risk for severe COVID-19, and if diagnosed with COVID, their treatment should be promptly re-evaluated and optimized. Women with PCOS also exhibit a higher risk for mental health problems like anxiety and depression. So such problems may be triggered or exacerbated with the COVID-19 pandemic. Clinicians should recognize the risk of this vulnerable female patient population and offer appropriate mental health support for prevention and treatment. Moreover, it should be mentioned that COVID-19 appears to predispose to thrombosis. So a diagnosis of COVID-19 can cause thromboembolic complications in women with PCOS. So what does the data say? This article published in May 2020 said that effect of lifestyle modification on anthropometric clinical and biochemical parameters in adolescent girls with PCOS. So these are the various coming slides. Also, I'm going to talk about the same thing. So I'm going to present a lot of forest plots and which indicate that diet intervention in such patients was associated with a significant decrease in BMI. Here also, in both these pictures, the graphs you see, results showed that exercise intervention significantly improved menstrual cycle regularities and the FG score. In addition, diet therapy was associated with a significant decrease in FG scores. Results revealed that exercise intervention decreased the triglyceride levels, and it also showed that lifestyle interventions like diet, exercise, behavior had no significant effects on HDL, LDL, and HOMA-IR. So to see these effects, lifestyle modification, a combination of diet, exercise, and behavioral interventions, was significantly associated with a decrease in LH and FAI. In addition, the exercise intervention significantly decreased the LH and AMH levels as well. This was another publication done in 2013 in Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. And the evidence suggests that lifestyle modification reduces fasting blood glucose and insulin levels in women with PCOS. And the effects have been similar to metformin. So what does Cochrane say? So this was an article published in March 2019. And the review supports the benefits of lifestyle treatment in women with PCOS, and it may improve biochemical and clinical hyperandrogenism. Lifestyle treatment may improve a number of anthropometric markers in women with PCOS. It also improves the lipid profile, specifically total cholesterol and LDL, despite the modest weight loss achieved. Another article published last year, which said the clinical outcomes were like improvement in menstrual frequency and pregnancy outcomes were not significantly different between lifestyle modification and metformin. As I previously mentioned of another study which said that metformin works the same as lifestyle modification. Lifestyle modification tends to have more benefits than metformin alone. And lifestyle modification with metformin improves the fasting serum insulin levels and menstrual cycles compared to lifestyle modification alone. And this resulted in no significant benefits in lowering BMI. Based on these results, we suggest selecting the appropriate treatment carefully while considering the side effects of metformin. If metformin is not indicated, lifestyle modification should be the primary recommendation in women with PCOS before starting metformin. So to conclude, lifestyle modification is an effective and safe option and should be considered as the first line of treatment in PCOD girls. It should mainly include dietary change, physical activity. It can reduce the prevalence of obesity and hormonal disorders in adolescents. And this is a non-invasive intervention, especially in adolescents. It causes about 5 to 10% weight loss in obese girls and can decrease androgen levels and menstrual cycle irregularities. So don't be tempted to skip breakfast or any meal to lose weight. While skipping a meal will reduce your calorie intake for that hour, but it will leave you much hungrier later on. So changing the way you eat can help you eat less and not feel deprived. So eat slow. It takes 15 more minutes for your brain to get the message that you've eaten. So slowing the rate of eating can allow you to feel full sooner and therefore you eat less. Use smaller plates. It helps to moderate the portions that you eat. Drinking at least 8 to 10 glasses of water each day, it helps you keep full. Serving food from the kitchen instead of at the table can help you be less tempted to eat more. So this is how you cut the calories. Weight management is a long-term challenge influenced by behavioral, emotional, and physical factors. Changing the way you approach weight loss can help you be more successful. So most people who are trying to lose weight focus on only one thing, that is weight loss. However, setting goals and focusing on changes in physical activity will be more productive. Sleep disturbances include altered sleep duration, delay of sleep onset, difficulty in maintaining sleep or awakening early. And these have a repercussion on your daytime mood, cognition, and psychomotor functioning, which acutely will affect your well-being and daily activities. So we need to work on our sleep. We need to limit the use of gadgets in our lives and maybe try to maintain, some time away from all of these. Instead, we can opt for traditional ways of cooking, maybe using other appliances like alarm clocks and cordless phones. And yes, this pandemic has been mentally stressful time for everyone. So is for our PCO patients. It's important as gynecologists to assure them, counsel them, treat them, and motivate them to be regular with their treatments. So this is my mantra: positive thinking, feel good, exercise regularly, eat better. So all this is required for healthy living. And there is no better time than now to start living healthier. So these are good tips. Practice gratitude, focus on good things in your life, identify what's negative, and look after your body and mind. Spend time with positive people. All of this, actually contributes to a healthy living. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Yukti. You have done a marvelous job. You have covered